Hey guys, it's Adrian. Welcome back to my channel. Today, I am here to bring you a spoiler-free series review. It's been a while since I've done one of these, but I'm very excited. Today's series is the Unravelling series by Elizabeth Norris, and that contains Unravelling and Unbreakable. I do know that there's an in-between little short book of novellas that's available on ebook. I have not yet read that one, so this is just about the main duology. So this series starts off by following a girl named Janelle. Now Janelle is a very put together, very organized teenage girl because she has to take care of her little brother Jared, who's also a teenager, but her mom is bipolar and her dad is an overworking FBI agent, so she's really responsible for the well-being of her family. So basically she's a no-nonsense kind of girl and things are very structured. Until one day she gets hit by a truck and she dies. And this is not a spoiler, this happens in the first 15 pages of the book. When she's dead, she's brought back by this mysterious boy from her high school named Ben, who she vaguely knows. And after she's brought back, weird things start to happen and she finds out that she has 24 days to work together with Ben to save the world from impending doom. I love a good impending doom book, so this series was right up my alley. I've been into thrillers lately, I keep saying that, but I love this book because thrillers are just fantastic. I've also mentioned that I don't like to go into my thrillers with too much information, so as far as a synopsis goes of the story, I'm not going to give you any more information about that, and obviously I'm not going to give you a synopsis for book 2 because it will ruin book 1 for you, but you should go read them. I'm going to start off and say that. This is definitely a series worth reading. So let's jump right in and talk about the plot. The plot in this book wasn't like the most complicated plot I've ever read. It wasn't necessarily the best plot I've ever come across, but it was really good. It's a thriller and it did what a thriller should do. It keeps you questioning things that are going on. It keeps me on the edge of my seat. It throws my emotions up and down and left and right and all over the place. And that's what I really loved, especially this first book. So in this first book, Unraveling, especially as far as the continuous questions goes, I was always wondering what was happening next, and every time I thought I figured it out, I had it completely wrong. I will say with this one, I was a little bit worried that it was going to take a turn that I didn't want it to take and turn into a kind of book that I just wasn't going to enjoy, but it didn't. It surprised me and it went in a completely different direction. I love this book. This book was definitely my favorite. And then we get to Unbreakable, which is the second book. This book was okay. I loved the first book. It's definitely going to be in my top books of the year, I think. The second book, though, because I love the book's first one so much, it didn't live up to it, and I had a harder time appreciating this book. It still was a good book, don't get me wrong. I'm going to critique this book in a little while, but don't think that I didn't like it. I did like it, just not as much as the first book. The second book, I feel like the premise was really good, but it just didn't live up to it, and it took turns that I couldn't appreciate as much. There are two things, a pro and a con, that I wanted to mention about the plot of both of these books. One of the pros is that the author in both books has the ability to break your heart. You will get heartbroken in both of these books. I did, and I don't get heartbroken very easily, but this book like ripped me from the inside and shredded me into tiny little pieces multiple times. One of the cons that I have about the plot of these books is the romance. And I have a couple problems with it. First of all, it's very insta-lovey. It's a YA thriller. That's just what's going to happen. Lots of insta-love. This one I could forgive a teeny little bit because all of the characters in this book are thrown together in like this race to death, basically. And so when you're in that kind of a situation, I can imagine that you get to know someone really quickly and you can develop feelings for them really quickly. So I can forgive it. What I didn't like, especially in the second book, is that it was a little too overdone. There was too much romance and it was too much like, without you, I'm gonna die. One of the other things that bothered me about this romance, and I think kind of was like the last drop in the bucket, was the actual romance itself. I didn't ship the two people that fell in love in this book. I think I did a little bit in the first book. I mean, I didn't necessarily ship them, but I understood it. But especially in the second book, I would have liked to see Janelle with somebody else. It obviously didn't happen, and that disappointed me, but that happens in books sometimes. So that didn't help the romance either. But if you can appreciate the cheesy kind of romance and get over it, I still do recommend this book because the thriller part of it was actually really good. And then we have the writing. The writing, like the plot, wasn't fantastic, but it wasn't terrible either. Especially in the first book, I didn't have any complaints about the writing at all. It didn't strike me as being problematic or being awe-inspiring or anything. It was just okay. It was writing. The second book though, and I think again because it didn't live up to the first book, I was being more critical. I found that the author used a lot of repetition. The characters kept doing the same movement, they kept thinking the same kinds of thoughts, and it just was very repetitious, and it started to irk me a little bit. So that's one thing to watch out for if you're really particular about those kinds of things. It does happen. There is a lot of repetition in the book. As far as the character goes, there are three main characters that I want to talk to you about. I'm going to start with the side characters first though, because the side characters fit into the story quite nicely. Lately I've been reading books that I haven't been appreciating the side characters as much, and while these side characters are not necessarily my favorite side characters, they did serve their purpose well. There's one side character named Elijah, and we see more of him in the second book, I think, or at least him in a different light in the second book. That I really enjoyed him because he is a quirky, sarcastic kind of guy, and that is just something that always draws my attention. He's just the kind of guy that has no filter. He just says what he thinks, and that comes in handy sometimes. Now moving on to our three main characters. First, let's talk about Janelle. Janelle is, like I said in the beginning of this video, she's a put together kind of person. And that I can really relate to because while I didn't have to take care of my family, my mom and dad were definitely there. I was the oldest child, and I'm also a very organized, structured, no nonsense kind of girl. So I related to her character, which helped because she was a very tropey character. She was definitely your typical teenage girl, saves the world, even though in real life that would be totally impossible. But because I liked her personality, in the first book especially, I could forgive and get past the trope. In the second book though, she has a lot of things happen to her physically that I just think, come on now, this couldn't really happen in real life. I know it's a book, but a person can only handle so much pain and so much trauma and so much, especially emotional trauma, because things just happen in this book emotionally for her and therefore me that I think she just, how does she even wake up the next day? I would like crawl in my bed and just die. So she was a little less believable in the second book, and her tropiness bothered me a little bit more. And then we've got Ben. I liked Ben because, especially from the get-go, he turned out to be more than what Janelle expected him to be, and he was just a nice guy. What I liked about both Janelle and Ben is that they're both really loyal to each other and their families and their friends, and that was really heartwarming to see. Despite everything that happens and all the bad things that go on, they look out for each other and their friends and their family, and that I think was commendable. And lastly, we've got Taylor Barclay, or Barclay, I don't really know how to say his name. In the first book, he was difficult to get to know. In the second book, I felt like I got to get to know him better. He is probably the only character in the book that I think had a better character development in the second book. The only thing that I have about him is the way that he reacts and responds and feels about Janelle in the end of the first book versus the beginning of the second book was a little bit of a jump for me. I missed the connection between there, and I get why, it wasn't explained very well in the book. But I really enjoyed his character in the second book. He was my favorite character in the second book by far. He just warmed my heart and then broke it, which surprised me, especially after the first book. So as a whole, I definitely recommend this series. If you like thrillers that have a little bit of a sci-fi twist to them, it was really good. As far as the second book goes, I know I've been kind of harsh on it. I do honestly go back and forth with whether or not I could have done without the book. I think that the way that the first book ended, I did want to know what happened to the characters next. So I am glad that I read it, but the second book didn't necessarily ruin it for me. It just didn't do it for me. I do recommend you read it though, because there are some things in this book that happened that were mind-boggling and really good. So I would say read the duology as a whole, but no at least in my opinion anyway, I wasn't a big fan of the second book. If you've read this duology, the first and the second book, let me know in the comments below how you felt about the second book. I gave the first book, Unraveling, a 5 stars because it did what a book should do. It was emotional, it threw my emotions everywhere, it kept me interested in the book the entire time, and it was a thriller. It was a thrilling thriller, and so it got a 5 stars from me. The second book, Unbreakable, I gave it 3.75 stars to because it just wasn't as good. But overall as a series, I'm going to give this a 4 stars. I definitely recommend it. So that wraps it up for this series review. If you enjoyed this video, give it a big thumbs up. If you haven't already, I'd love for you to subscribe. And if you've read this duology, either the first or the second book, leave it in the comments below so I can know what you think about it, because I love to discuss these things with you. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye!